Mal has highlighted that I start every single video with "Hello, everybody." So today I'm determined not to. But hello there. Nice to see you. Welcome to Reddit Roast. Mal, great to see you again.
Hello.
We are at Reddit Roast number 28 today, and we've got a bunch of entrepreneurial applicants, which is quite interesting. Which ones are going to do well and which ones are going to flop? It's always quite hit and miss with entrepreneurs. We've got a bunch of finance applicants who are falling into the classic weakness that finance applicants often have. And we got somebody whining about the MIT video essay. Should we dive in?
Yes, we shall. Profile one. What can I do to improve my profile for M7? Background, US born Indian male, 4 years of work experience, is applying next year. GPA 3.94 in mechanical engineering with a minor in computer science. From T150 University. Does that even mean anything? We'll get into that with Sam. Work experience, worked at a Japanese auto manufacturer as a product engineer, mainly responsible for making sure global spec guidelines are maintained. Uh, Nature of my work is pretty international as well. GRE 328, but also studying for the GMAT. LOR, direct supervisor, has OP has a good performance ratings every year, so he's sure that the recommender can do some really good writing there. Reason for my MBA, I want to pivot out of engineering and into consulting for the auto tech industry. Long term, move into corporate strategy. Some of
Mhm.
my work involved leading some project leaders, which is where I realized I don't like pure engineering as much as I thought. EC, OP likes to play golf and lift so he can recover from a knee injury he got while rock climbing. Not a very strong area. What do you think of this profile, Sam?
Okay, let's dive in. Right, academics 3.94 is pretty strong for sure. From a T150 university, I mean, that basically is saying a no-name university, I think. So that's not certainly not adding much value. The in terms of the GRE 328, I think you said, yeah, 328, skew towards quant. So that's nice. 328 is pretty much in line with the average of the M7s. Nothing special, but not bad either. And then we've obviously got the GMAT on the way. Hopefully that might come up. But yeah, 328 is a solid GRE if the GMAT doesn't improve. Demographics, Indian, US born Indian male, certainly overrepresented. Extracurriculars, I think this is the weak point. And OP mentions this, but like why? I have a slightly different angle. OP mentions golf.
Mhm.
That's a solo endeavor. Lifting, also a solo endeavor. Rock climbing, maybe a group activity, but it's mainly a solo endeavor. It's certainly not a team sport. So yeah, ECs, like, how are you going to convey that you work with a team from based on ECs? You have no teamwork experience there. As none of the ECs, if anything, you look like quite a solo. Yeah, Napoleon solo is the word that I've heard said. So ECs, I think, are a weak area in this profile. Professional. Now, we've seen some pretty strong results in the past from auto engineers. Every year in these cohorts, there's a couple of people from this space, and a Japanese OEM is probably one of the well-known brands, the Yamahas or the Hondas of the world. Quite a strong brand there. But look, I'm not seeing much in the way of rock star achievements on the professional side. Ah, international helps fine. Um, Performance reviews, I think it says like the performance is quite
Yeah.
it's quite solid somewhere. That also helps, but is nothing here that's blowing their socks off. From a work experience perspective, I don't think. Goals, consulting for auto is okay. That's not a bad goal. It's a bit generic in that you're kind of throwing yourself in the pot with all the other people who say they want to do consulting after the MBA. But you've got that auto angle and certainly the credibility there. I would make sure you narrow that down. And like the goal here, ideally, is to focus, for example, on a niche auto industry consultancy, not just say McKinsey, Bain, BCG, like all the other people that are saying consulting are going to say. So try and narrow that down a little bit if possible. I think, but either way, there's no getting around it. Consulting as a goal is not particularly sexy, particularly for the Harvard, Stanford, Wharton applications. We know that those top, Harvard and Stanford in particular, put like among the lowest proportions of people into consulting after the MBA. So particularly if you're focused on those schools, try and go a little bit beyond just saying I want to go into consulting for the goals is really, really important. So overall, look, a solid profile. I'm not seeing much flair for Harvard, Stanford in particular, but I think M7's on the cards.
Okay. So OP's question for you then is, what can I do between now and next September to improve my profile?
Yeah, that's a solid question. So I think you got to fix your weaknesses. Like it's often the case that people have glaring weaknesses, and in this case, yeah, there's no exception. I think the big ones are the extracurricular. That is just a really boring bunch of extracurriculars. There's nothing teamwork in there, really, nothing community in there at all. I would say take on a leadership role in a community activity would be the big one. I would also say that if there's any way of taking up more leadership experience at work, that would also be valuable. There's no real mention, certainly no mention of managing anybody, but you can still take on leadership responsibility, for example, by mentoring interns, right? There's still things you can do to take on leadership responsibility in the work environment, even if you're not actually, promoted to a manager. So that's the other thing. The other kind of recommendation I would have, basically, you need something for for Harvard's leadership essay. What are you going to write about rock climbing? Who are you leading? Like the guy holding the rope? Like that's not going to work. You don't have any management experience in your work that I can see. So really that is the key gap, and that's going to need strengthening. The other thing you can do is start buttering up your recommenders. The OP talks about LORs here, and they do look pretty strong. I think possibly a strong point on the profile. But you can always butter them up more. You can also always keep these performance ratings coming in strong. That's a big thing. Don't take your eye off the ball professionally, even while studying for the GMAT, etc. And then obviously, the other thing you can do is crush the GMAT. And I guess we'll talk about that next. I think that was one of the other questions that OP had.
Yeah. Do you think OP should take the GMAT?
Like 328 is okay, but if Harvard, Stanford is where OP's aiming, it's not going to, it's not smashing the lights out. Particularly as the software engineering batch and the Indian software engineering batch, especially, sorry, I don't mean software engineering, but engineers generally, the Indian engineers tend to have very, very high standardized test scores. It also sounds like OP has on his GRE, quant is stronger. Now, historically, this is quite a big, broad statement, but historically, people who are better at quant tend to do better in the GMAT than the GRE. And therefore, as a betting man, I'd be willing to bet that OP is probably going to have a stronger percentile on the GMAT than is coming through on the GRE. So, short answer is yes. I think OP should take the GMAT. They've got to distinguish themselves from the other Indian engineers or US Indian engineers, and that's one good way to do it. And so, short answer is yes.
So OP's mock GMAT is coming up to 635. What do you think is a good GMAT score that OP would need to compete at Harvard, Stanford? What?
Yeah, that's fair. Look, the average of those schools is historically where we have the data. The old GMAT was about 730 thereabouts, 720, 730. That converts in the new GMAT to about a 695 or so average. And I'd like OP to have an average above have a score above the average as an Indian US male engineer. So, 705 would be a really nice target.
Okay. All right. I think that's all. Should we move on to profile number 2 then?
Let's do it. Next profile.
Right. Next profile. Profile evaluation with no name, school, and SME experience. So OP's decided to go back to business school next year. Wants to go to M7. Male, 27, Southeast Asian countries, an underrepresented applicant. Graduated from a top local university, but OP says it's relatively unknown globally. GPA 3.2, but that is also top 10% of the class at the university OP is at. GMAT 675. Work X. OP has 2 years at a Big Four consulting firm, 2 years of founding my own fintech startup for underserved citizens. ultimately closed due to lack of funding. Decided to go back to work to another startup as chief of staff, overseeing strategic growth projects. All of the OP's work is domestic. Admission story: grew from consulting, found some interesting problems to solve, opened a startup, failed, decided to slow down, helped another startup go from 0 to 1 successfully, and now OP is looking at an MBA. LOR, either from my previous director or from the CTO of the latest startup, not sure. Goals: startup again in Chicago, or VC growth capital firms in fintech and tech. What's your read on this profile?
Yeah, interesting one, I think. For academically, right? 3.2. Now, this is a great example of why we don't convert GPAs if they don't ask for it. In an American system, a 3.2 would be pretty lackluster, right? Average is 3.6. But OP is saying that this is top 10% of the class. So what I'm guessing has happened is they've gone to some system, they've converted the grade, it spat out a 3.2, they've put that in, and actually they're top 10% of the class. There's something wonky going on there with the conversion. So be very careful with that. Anybody watching, don't convert your score, especially if it's strong. Just submit it as it is in the raw form. Let the school do the conversion. So academically, it definitely does look strong, aside from that weird conversion issue. GMAT 675 is equivalent to about a 710 or so on the old test. A little bit below M7 average, but sort of in the right ballpark. In terms of this university issue, look, top local public university, but relatively unknown globally. Look, adcoms their job is to read academic transcripts and resumes, etc. They will know your university. Even if like Joe Blogs on the street doesn't know your university, the AdCom will. So if it's a strong university locally, that definitely acts in your favor. So that's a positive. And similarly, they will understand the grades that come out of that university, even if it is some obscure country that many Americans can't find on a map. So there's a good, the academics fairly solid. Now, demographics. Southeast Asian.
Mm-hmm.
This could or may or, I mean, it is underrepresented probably, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to act in OP's strong, as a major advantage. For example, like historically Vietnamese people, we've worked with a few Vietnamese clients in the past, have fairly difficult access to the US job market. And so it depends a little bit on which Southeast Asian country we are talking about, but we'll take OP's word for it and assume that it is URM, but just be a little bit careful on that. Extracurriculars, not mentioned at all as far as I can see. That might be a little bit of a pink flag, especially with all of this interesting stuff that OP's been doing on the work front. They haven't got any extracurriculars. That could be a weakness, maybe. Now, professional, this is where things get interesting. I like this story. Telco is really the bit that's jumping out at me. Every year we get a few really strong telco applicants who build a narrative around the benefits of bringing communications, bringing connectivity to a certain demographic, a certain rural area, and how that helps people to access different job markets and remote working and blah, blah, blah. There's always a bunch of strong telco applicants, and I'm putting OP in that bucket. The startup and entrepreneurship experience is really interesting as well. OP, there's an interesting point here that says OP had a startup that failed, I think.
Yeah.
Where was that? Yeah, this startup that failed in the story. Now, anybody watching, this isn't just for OP, this is anybody watching who started a startup and failed. This is not going to be a negative on your profile. We had a Harvard client last year get admitted where their midsection of their work experience was a failed startup. They got a heap of leadership experience from that, curiosity experience from that, loads of essay material from a failed startup. As long as you can show how you've learned from it and how you've grown from it, the failure itself is just an interesting step in a journey. Do not worry that that's going to kneecap your application. It's a good thing. So I really like OP's professional story. I think they've obviously thought about the narrative as well and how it all fits together, which is really interesting. So I think OP's strength is probably the work experience. In terms of goals, doing another startup. Now, as anybody watching our roasts in the past will know, I am generally very wary of having post-MBA goals as entrepreneurship. Why? Because it's just it's a risk for the schools, right? What if your startup doesn't go well? What if you don't pay yourself for a few years? They get ranked on your 3-year post MBA salary typically. And if your startup doesn't go well for 3 years, your salary might suck. So there's lots of reasons why a post MBA goal of a startup can typically be a red flag, can be a weakness. This will come down to whether OP can convince the AdCom they have enough entrepreneurship experience to succeed this time round. If not, the lower risk option is to move the startup to the longer term goal, which is fine. Identify the gap that you need to fill in the meantime and have a stepping stone as your short term goal. That could work. We'd need to go into a bit more detail on that. But I think goals I'll call them neutral. So overall, a solid profile, plenty to work with for sure. A couple of gaps, yes.
Okay. OP's first question is about, like we mentioned, we touched on his no-name experience for a bit, but do I still have a chance to apply for M7 with most of my time spent on no-name things?
Yeah, certainly brands are not a strength for OP. Maybe the university that is top tier, top locally might carry a little bit of weight, but it's certainly in the work experience, it sounds like there's not that much obvious, strong brands that they can obviously leverage. Now, there are ways of doing this. OP, I would say things like naming the investors, right? The global bank's venture arm, right? On your resume, for example, put the startup name and then put brackets backed by venture arm of Standard Chartered, for example. So even if your brand itself hasn't got value, hasn't got weight, you can leverage the brands of, for example, your investors or your clients, etc. So there are ways of leveraging other brands to maximize your credibility. But yes, it's true. Brands are not a strength for OP. Does OP have a chance at M7? A chance, yes. It's definitely not a done deal. But if OP can put together a strong leadership story, if OP can get credit for that strong undergrad, if OP can put together a series of goals, short and long term, that really make sense and lead to a clear social benefit, if all of those things are yes, then yeah, I think M7's on the cards potentially.
Okay, and in M7s, which schools specifically do you think would help OP connect with the US startup world?
Yeah, look, OP does seem to be very focused on Chicago. And also obviously the Kellogg and Booth of the world are the standout schools. I did a little bit of digging from the class profiles. I believe Booth put 4% of people into entrepreneurship after graduation. Wharton are also making a big push for entrepreneurship, and I think the number's like 6% there. So I would say that if entrepreneurship really is the goal, then those Kellogg, Wharton, and Booth should be really the focus. But I would say include a few T10s in there as well for safety. And particularly, I think the next question is going to be scholarships. Scholarships are generally hard to come by for international applicants. They're less abundant for international applicants. So you should be ready to self-fund OP to some extent, right? Start looking up loans, all this stuff. Like you're going to definitely have to think about it. But if scholarships are critical, then apply. The key thing is to apply to a bunch of different programs, bunch of different schools, try and secure multiple admits, and then start negotiating on scholarships. And if you do that well, I think a sort of mid 5-figure number is on the cards, like a kind of 50K is in scholarship is not unreasonable. You're not going to get the full amount, right? 200K, whatever. Forget it. That's not going to happen. But 50K is plausible if you can get multiple admits from a couple of good T10s or M7s. You can negotiate that, and so kind of short answer is yes. Scholarships, there is a chance. You're going to need multiple admits, a strong application, strong career narrative, and then be ready to negotiate. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for the review, Sam. Should we move on to the next one?
Of course, let's do it.
All right. Profile number 3. Competitive for McCombs. I'm retaking the GRE in 11 days. My last score was 162 verbal, 154 quant. That's 316, I believe. I know it's not ideal, and
But
how
the edit, but the
yeah,
edit
it was
scored
my
a 323 GRE.
yeah, well done, OP.
Well done.
Quick profile snapshot. Undergrad, Service Academy, 2.37 GPA. And Lopi says that's due to immaturity. Bit tough metric there. Major political science, minor in Japanese. Job experience, 8 years of military experience as an officer. Some extracurriculars in there as well. A D1 college athlete, volunteer for underserved community service in a poor project, in the starting stages of building a media brand. That includes a couple of YouTube videos, one Spotify episode, some Substack and LinkedIn work there as well. In planning phase to help a friend launch a non-profit business. OP's demographics, Black male, 30 years old. Some goals, strategy consulting at T2 or MBB in the short term. Long term, startup consulting, VC, or product/branding management. OP also lives near Austin. This is an extra little tidbit there. Has multiple family and friends there and wants to stay there indefinitely and keep investing in the community, help local business grow. It's related to OP's goals as well. Both OP's nonprofit project and media brand are inspired by this motivation. So what do you think about all of this overall?
Okay, with a focus on McCombs, let's walk through this this background. 2.7 is 2.37 is a shocker. That is going to be a real issue. So academically, not a great start. But the 323, not a bad, good effort. OP, that is going to offset it somewhat, but you're still going to need a really strong optional essay to explain why that GPA was what it was. And by the way, immaturity will not cut it. You've got to be more detailed and more thoughtful about it. So undergrad and score-wise, academic-wise, not great. Demographic, Black male, 30 years old, fair to say underrepresented particularly with the military experience as well, underrepresented for sure. Extracurriculars. I like this a lot, very strong. OP clearly has a lot going on the extracurricular side, everything from the college athlete to the volunteering. Just think about all these applicants we see that have got undergrad extracurriculars and haven't really done anything since then. OP is volunteering in an underserved community, starting a media brand, and helping a friend launch a nonprofit. These are real extracurriculars, real interesting extracurriculars that is going to help OP stand out. How to leverage that, we'll talk about in a moment, but really strong on the EC side. Professional, military. I did a little bit of digging, about 14%, I believe, here we go, of the McCombs cohort is military. So that will certainly help OP in the, that's higher than the typical 10% we see at other schools. There's certainly a military focused program. So that's cool. In terms of progression within the military, look, there's going to be 8 years there as an officer doing general management. I expect, and team leadership. I expect there's quite a lot in the way of leadership stories going on there. And that is really, really nice. So I think work experience wise is a positive overall for OP. And I think somewhat offsets the low GPA to some extent. Goals. Now, I'm not entirely sure that this consulting at an MBB is the right approach. I think there's going to be a lot of very strong academically minded applicants who are going to have MBB as their goal, who are going to, frankly, be better positioned for that goal than OP. OP, you have strengths, but your academics are just not one of them in the MBA sort of context. And therefore, that MBB goal, I think schools are going to look at that and think, eek. But I like the long-term goals. I think there's a bit more going on there in terms of brand management, product management, etc. Those I think are a bit more appropriate. Now, what I would say to OP, if I was working with OP as a client, is let's think about where you're actually strong and let's build that into your goals. This side hustle that you've got going on, where you've got a YouTube going on, you've got Substack, you've got LinkedIn posts, etc. There's a bit of a media brand coming through here. Would there be a media narrative that perhaps makes more sense than MBB? Maybe. Is there the other thing, leveraging the military experience? There are some companies that are actively looking for veterans. For example, the Amazon Pathways go out of their way to find military post MBA grads with military experience. That is a much more compelling short-term goal for the business school. Now, obviously, once you're on the program, you can apply for consulting if you want, but your goals in the essays need to be something more achievable than this, I think. So goals, not ideal. So with that, I think a solid profile, I think an okay profile for McCombs, if you can explain that GPA strongly. I think that's what it comes down to.
Okay. The GRE score that OP got up to 323, is that score and OP's profile in general good enough, given the holistic look that AdCom takes towards an application? Or is OP in significant trouble if this retake doesn't improve my quant? But is that good enough for McCombs, do you think?
Is a 323 good enough for McCombs? I think it probably is. I think well, certainly if it wasn't for the GPA, the 323 would be okay for McCombs. It would tick the box. It's not knocking any, shooting any lights out, but it's okay. I think, I can't come back to this GPA. This is going to be the issue. Why is this an issue? Look, I did a bit of research in terms of the ranges and the averages of these schools. You need to understand that. So McCombs don't actually publish their range, but we know the average GPA is 3.48. That means OP is, a full, a massive full point deviation away from the average. And they don't publish a range, but to give you some context, I did a bit of digging into other schools that are kind of comparable. Wash U, Olin, published their GPA range. Their lowest was 2.7, which is higher than the 2.37 here. So Rice Jones published their range, the mid 50% range, and that was a 3.17. So however you slice it, OP is going to be well below the McCombs, I suspect, bottom end of the GPA range. Now, what therefore should OP do? We can speculate all day long, but OP, if I was in your shoes, I would get in touch with the AdCom and I would ask them very bluntly, hey, this is my background, but I've got 2.37 GPA. Is it even worth me applying? Now their answer is gonna skew positively because they are ultimately salespeople and they want to get you to apply, but you might be able to read from their body language whether or not it's realistic. That would be my approach. Given you've just got such a big, obvious red flag on the profile, you just need to ask the school directly. And also OP is so laser focused on one particular school. It's not like they need to go to 10 different schools and ask loads of different people. Literally just one school, ask the AdCom, polish up your resume before you do it, get your narrative in mind, get narrative clear before you do it. But just ask them.
Okay. And you said that the OP's extracurriculars are really strong. How do you think OP can leverage those given the GRE and the GPA?
Yeah, good question. There's two ways. The first is to link the goals to these extracurriculars. Right, we've talked a bit about the goals, what the goals could look like. If the goals were related to, for example, the media goals I mentioned before, right? If your goals are joining Netflix, whatever, as in a content creation role or a content strategy role, whatever, based on the media story, that might work, and that's one way of doing it. Or you could even combine it, taking it a step further, combine that with the underserved communities that OP is volunteering with. There might be a way of merging all of those into quite a niche media related goal. So that's one way of leveraging the media experience. Now, the other thing is aside from the goals and the career narrative, the other side is on the leadership stories. Now, McCombs' essay 2, I believe it is share a specific example of how a value guided your decisions and actions. Highlight how it influenced your leadership style and your life path. Basically, it's a leadership story. And that leadership story could either come from the 8 years of military experience, or it could come from the extracurriculars and for example, the building the media brand or the helping the friend launch a nonprofit. So essay 2 can directly reference those ECs. So 2 ways that the ECs can benefit OP. Hopefully that's of some value. But I do think OP should speak to the school first.
All right. Okay. I think that's all for OP. Should we move on?
Let's do it.
Cool. Okay. Harvard Wharton round 2 admit chances. Profile, OP is from a top private engineering undergrad in India, 8.35 out of 10 GPA, which is the top 20th percentile. Has a minor in finance, GMAT 715, led 3 clubs during college, that's the student placements, investment, and MUN club. Work experience, 1 year at JPM mid-office, 2 years at India's largest investment bank, 1.5 years at a global PE mega fund, and a 6-month Portco secondment. Closed 2 deals, launched 2 sectors, and sourced $100 million in mandates at the investment bank. At the fund, OP created a $5 billion deal pipeline. Lots of really impactful work I'm seeing there. At Portco, led teams across 10 departments. Again, a lot more impact, benefited 300,000 students and patients in K-12 and healthcare lending sectors. Strong LORs from the fund's India head and the CEO of Portco. Goals, OP wants to create their own financial services focused impact PE fund. Other points, I see some extracurriculars, taught underprivileged kids, and passed tech exams meant for college grads. What's your read on this?
Interesting. Academics, right. Top 20% of a top private engineering undergrad in India. That is strong. It's solid. 715, 99th percentile. I believe that equates to about a 760 on the old test, which is 30 points above the average. Academically, very, very strong. Demographic, Indian male engineer with or slash finance, definitely overrepresented for sure. Extracurriculars, as is often the case with finance applicants, they seem to be the Achilles heel, the weakness. Everything that I can see is from undergrad, which is, 5 years ago or whatever. There is no indication of any community involvement more recently than undergrad. And why is that bad? everybody has undergrad community experience. Like, joining a club during undergrad, you basically mandatory, like you kind of have to. So the extracurriculars really are not carrying much weight. And then the same thing, taught the underprivileged kids in school. I mean, how many Indian applicants do we see who've taught underprivileged kids? Like half of them. Yeah. And also it was in school, so it was even further back. So really a weak spot around extracurriculars here for OP. Professional, I think this is where OP really shines. We were talking about brands before. 1 year at JP Morgan's. Okay, it's mid-office, but in terms of JP Morgan, the brand is as strong as it gets in finance. 2 years at India's largest investment bank, also going to be a strong brand. 1.5 years at a global PE mega fund, KKR, etc. Very, very strong brands on the PE side. So professionally, OP looks like as about as strong as it gets, to be honest. Outstanding. Recommenders look great too. Really strong LORs here, especially if OP has directly worked with these 2 people. And I expect they have. The CEO of the Portco, I imagine he reports directly to the CEO. So really strong on the LOR side. So from a professional perspective, really impactful work. Doesn't get much stronger than that. It's amazing. Goals. I'm a bit wary of these goals. As I always say, entrepreneurship, create my own financial services fund. Now, OP does say that could be a long-term goal. That's what I think OP should do. I think with OP can think of a sensible short-term goal that plugs the gap or acts as a stepping stone towards creating your own financial services fund in the long term, that would be a very strong set of goals as well. So overall, look, I don't say this lightly, particularly for Indian engineers, this is a very strong profile. This is a strong profile. I'm really, really impressed. I like it a lot. And yeah, in a competitive pool, even within a competitive bunch, strong academics, really impressive.
So you think OP has a realistic shot at Harvard and Wharton?
Ha! It's always going to be tough at those schools, but if any Indian male engineer has a chance, it's OP.
I think OP is finance.
Yeah,
But
but okay,
similar.
engineer with finance. You could say Indian finance, it's still the same thing. It's going to be an extremely competitive application. But OP, yeah, generally has a chance.
Okay. And what kind of narrative do you think, given this work experience, what kind of narrative do you think OP can, weave together and create for these topics?
It's going to be really important. It's going to be really important. I would argue that the starting point needs to be a story of the impact that's been had. OP talks about benefiting 300,000 students, for example, patients. Now, but let's be careful. It looks like OP might be a private equity in the healthcare space, which is a sensitive subject in terms of price gouging, etc. So really important that OP conveys having a positive impact on the world in a story. Following that, conclusively lay out a really clear mission, right? Based on this experience, I want to now have the same impact at a larger scale on a particular market, on a particular segment, right? Really crystallize that story into a clear mission. Then the question is, okay, how are you going to have that impact? Short-term goal, either getting the skills that you need, or maybe you want to start having that impact already. For example, if the focus is on financial services, then maybe it's around maybe the short-term goal is a startup that's really enabling financial independence and financial freedom in a particular market, a Revolut or something, for example, that is really having the impact that OP wants to have. Finally, with a long-term goal where OP can really can start their own financial services firm and really, or a financial service impact PE fund, sorry, so an investment fund where OP can really have that impact and tackle that mission that OP's mentioned. So a classic narrative with a few unknowns and a few gaps in there, but broadly, really, I would say, like nothing unusual required in the career goals essay. Just follow the structure, follow the classic career goal structure, and OP will be in a great place.
Okay, I think you've got a really good chance there, OP. Sam, should we move on next then?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this is our final profile for the day. Short, sweet. Hi all, I'm currently working as a valuation analyst in NYC, at one of the larger names in the evaluations. Graduated this spring, so OP is a bit just a recent graduate from a top 40 university with a 3.95 GPA. Well done, studying finance and math. My internships were in corporate finance and VC, both in the same sector I'm working in now. Hasn't mentioned which sector that is. GMAT is 740. OP wants to retake. Long-term goal, work in sector group, IB, or private equity. What MBA programs are realistic for OP?
Yeah, short, very, very short, very sweet. 3.95 strong GPA for sure. 740 strong GMAT as well. So OP is above the average in both aspects. So very, very strong academically for sure. Demographic, I'm not sure we know. I'm guessing American. We don't know. I would also guess male potentially from the work and the background, but maybe not. So probably quite overrepresented on the demographic side, possibly. Extracurriculars, not much. What are we seeing?
OP is in the comments, I think. OP is mentioned. Finance club and OP was in the honors college, did tutoring and mentoring. OP was also TA for finance and team lead for an honors
But it's all undergrad stuff, right?
All undergrad stuff yet
All
again.
undergrad stuff. So not great on the extracurriculars, I don't think. The TA, I think there was a TA mentioned. That can be interesting if you can use it to talk about a leadership style. But again, it's old. So I think, again, we keep seeing it. Finance applicants, no extracurriculars, again and again and again. This is going to be this is the Achilles heel here. On the financial, on the professional side. So it looks like OP is doing some quite interesting work on the valuation front, and the short-term goal is to, I think it was IB, OP mentioned in the
long term.
comments.
It's up. There's no short-term goal mentioned, but OP's overall goal is IB or PE.
Right. So that can work, preferably IB rather than PE. On the IB side, schools have very established pipelines and connections to the top investment banks. So that's very doable. Private equity, not quite so much. So private equity tends to be the longer term goal with IB as the stepping stone. So goals very solid. That can work. So overall, we don't have all the information. EC is probably their weakness, but a strong profile.
Okay. And do you think M7 programs are realistic for OP?
Not yet. I think OP is talking about applying in a couple of years' time, or in a year or so's time. I think we saw that in the comments somewhere. But if OP can fill those gaps, which is going to take a year or two, then M7's yes, because there is this really strong, solid base. But to fill the gaps, that's going to take a couple of years. So what are the gaps? I mean, the big one is leadership. Okay, OP's young, but still, often finance applicants generally would demonstrate, young applicants would demonstrate leadership on the extracurriculars. There's none of that here. Because OP's young, doesn't have management experience directly in the workplace. So that's tough. Maybe OP in the next year or so can go and get extracurricular experience, leadership within that, and maybe start taking on mentorship experience within the workplace. I don't know if OP's company has an internship program. OP is fairly, a relatively young colleague in the group, could be involved in mentoring interns, for example. So between the extracurriculars and the leadership responsibility at work, those are the two key gaps that I think OP can fill. And if OP fills those, then a T15 or an M7, I think, is on the cards in a year's time.
Okay. I think that's all for profiles today. You ready for our bonus question?
Let's do it.
Okay. Spicy title right off the bat. MIT video essay is the cringiest thing I've ever seen. OP's already submitted applications to Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia, and has been preparing for Sloan for the past 2 weeks. Now, Sloan requires this 60-second presentation video. It's that introduction video where to talk about yourself for a minute. And after having watched official tips and advices, I started looking at actual video examples online, found those really cringe. I saw people singing, others were playing guitar, or speaking 2 different languages in a row. Some were almost playing basketball in front of the camera, others were citing poems. So when looking for explanations for such behavior, I found people saying it is better to show your passions that simply tell. The problem is, I love to dance, and I dance a lot. I tried to make a video essay. I spare you the details, but it was the ultimate level of cringy. So now OP's question is, OP does not know how to make this video. Do you have tips to make it normal?
Yeah, okay. I'm just imagining like the dance routine at the start of the video. Oh my God. I know, OP, I know exactly what you mean. When you Google these and you get all the YouTube videos of people that have done them way back, some of them are horrifically cringe. But look, it doesn't have to be. We work with dozens, I would say, of MIT applicants every year, and all of them have to make this video, have been doing for years. We've seen a lot of these. Now, the reason this is cringe, or the reason you're seeing these cringe pieces, is because applicants are overemphasizing the dance or the baseball. You're not applying to dance school. You're not applying to baseball school. They don't really care about these things. The AdCom don't really care about these things. Yeah, if it makes you an interesting person, but shooting a hoop in the video does not make you an interesting person. What makes you an interesting person is your ability to tell stories. Your ability to tell stories. I find that the best and most historically most successful MIT Sloan videos is somebody sitting calmly in front of a camera and telling a story about an activity that is interesting, telling a story of basketball camp and how the applicant like brought a junior under their wing and helped support them, and that telling that story shows storytelling ability. You're using, the fact that it's basketball, that's part of the story. It's not the core. The core is the behavioral trait that you demonstrated and the feelings that you had when you saw this kid getting bullied, so you brought them under your wing. Like, it's that storytelling. They love storytelling. Why? Because leaders tell stories, right? It's marketing 101 is tell a story. They love it if you can demonstrate your ability to tell a story. And if you sit calmly in front of a camera in a quiet environment, well dressed, maybe using a couple of props while you tell your story, you're conveying leadership ability. And that's not cringe. That's not cringe. If it feels cringe, it might be because you're telling such a vulnerable and personal story that you'd hate for somebody else to see it. That's a good kind of cringe. That's a good kind of cringe. We can live with that. Because that vulnerability, again, is a leadership trait. So don't start the video with a basketball shot. Start the video with a story about basketball, told to the camera calmly, maturely, professionally. And that won't feel cringe. And if you do that well, that's going to be taken seriously. You're going to get a lot of points on the leadership column, and you're going to go, and it's going to work really well.
And then I also think that OP can link to MIT in some way, right?
Yeah, I would say the final, typically of the minute, the final like maybe 10 seconds are like, so at MIT, I'll build a culture of supporting each other, for example, or I'll join I don't have a basketball club, but a sports club perhaps that's relevant to the story that's mentioned. Connecting the story then to your activities, clubs at MIT at the end is a really nice way of showing that you've done a bit of research. Now, don't overclub this. This is not a why MIT video, right? Some schools have those. This is not one of them. So don't spend too much time talking about MIT's clubs. Focus on your backward-looking story. But yeah, 5-10 seconds at the end, linking it to clubs is always a good idea as well.
Okay. I think that's all for our roast today, Sam.
Quick plug on that. MBAconsultant.com has some great guidance and example videos of sensible, good, high quality, professional MIT videos. Check it out.
Yes. All right.
Great stuff.
Yeah, I think
That's so hilarious. Also, who says I leveraged the last 2 weeks? I was reading through the comments. There's someone in classic Reddit style. Somebody is roasting them for this. Where is it?
It's such professional jargon.
The use of the word leverage in the first sentence.
Yeah. Yeah, OP, this isn't LinkedIn. This is Reddit. Come on.
Yeah, I would second that. You leveraged the last 2 weeks. Good for you, OP. All right.
Yeah, good luck with MIT, OP.
Good luck with MIT.
Yeah.
Great session again today, as usual. Really, really nice. Thank you for putting together all those profiles, and I'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you for roasting. See you next week.
Yeah, see you later. Bye.
Bye.